All right. Hey, everybody. It is indie author Nick Belisi here again for another live stream. I know we had one last night, but as I stated last night, Thursdays, that's where we're going to dive into each book. We're going to go chapter by chapter, one chapter per week. Today, we're going to get a little extra just because of the prologue, but, we are going to start getting into that. On our Thursday nights, basically what we're going to do is I'm not going to read the book, but I'm going to go through, obviously different things that have to do with the book and, little Easter eggs and how I came up with the ideas and stuff like that. And then if you guys have any questions at the end of the live chat, I'll try to take notes while I'm doing this. If not, you can certainly post them. I'll give a couple minutes at the end and I will get all of your questions answered. So, to dive right into it, basically the book that we're going to be discussing first is my first book. It is The Souls of Paradise, Family is Forever. I originally started making the book back in 2013. I was attending the Art Institute of Pittsburgh, and one of my assignments at the time was to start coming up with a storyline. And as the years progressed and stuff like that, I started adding little tidbits to it. But ultimately, it was just little by little. I didn't actually come up with the vast majority of it until about, I want to say 4 years later, right around like 2017, 2018 is when the bulk of it actually came together. The reason being is because I had a child and I didn't know what was going to happen with this. And the original thought was that I was getting together with a group of people that I went to school with, and we were going to make this into a video game, actually. It wound up not becoming anything, unfortunately. So I wanted to keep the story going, because by that time, I had about half of it written. I was really into the story. It really started to take shape, so I wanted to keep it going, and that's when I decided to turn it into a novel. I've always basically been a writer when it started with journals and stuff like that, as far as being able to vent with certain things in my life. So when I, decided that I wanted to make it into a novel, I really put my writing to the test. Now, there's been a lot of changes over the years as far as that goes. I mean, one of the most notable changes that has to do with the book was it actually wasn't even meant to be called the name that's currently called. The original manuscript that I actually came up with, it was going to be called Paradise Lost, and it looked something like this. I had, I had it made into a big copy so I can kind of motivate myself to keep going, but, with the obvious that's a very popular name of another book. So, you see that name in a lot of places. But I changed the name to The Souls of Paradise, actually, in 2022, when I realized that I wasn't going to go with the original name. The artwork was actually, the artwork for the book was helped by a non-copyright image that Stormy came up with, and I altered to fit what I was looking for in the original design, because, the original design looks something like this, and then turning it into something like this. It's very close to what I wanted, so I wanted to keep that and, pay homage to the original idea of what I was doing. A co-worker of mine, a friend of mine, is Sierra Slate. She actually introduced me to the Amazon KDP self-publishing thing last year. And, I finally thought that, okay, now it would be time to get this book out there and, see what happens. And, so far the book has been out since last October, so almost a year. And, I've gotten a lot of good feedback about it. I was surprised, how many people actually really enjoyed it and, took the time to read it. We are getting close to 100 sales right now on that book. So, in a year, this is way more than I expected. And I'm very humbled and grateful for all that. So, to get us started, now that I gave you some background of the book, we are going to talk about basically the summary. So the summary of the book, it follows the life of a woman named Stella Morgan. Originally, actually, her name was Stephanie Morgan, in my Paradise Lost. Weird coincidence, I had done that way back, when I first started college. I had come up with that name. And coincidentally, my child's mother, who I started dating about a year later, her name was Stephanie. And it actually turned out to be, because it's Stephanie Morgan, Morgan is actually my daughter's middle name. All really wasn't planned, but after I went through a child custody thing and stuff like that, I managed to, I thought it'd be best to change the character's name since me and my child's mother didn't end on the greatest terms. So Stella was born at that point, and the character was rebranded to be, more like a different version of myself rather than a standalone character. So I came up with it at that point, but to get back to it, the summary it follows the life of Stella Morgan, who has gone through some emotional turmoil in her life due to the loss of her sister. It's not explained until way later in the book how that occurred, but it is explained in the first two, the prologue and the first chapter, that her sister did pass away. It changed the lives of everyone, including Stella and her father, and it was a tough thing, and being compiled with Stella being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, the two of those things mixed together, created a lot of turmoil in her life. And basically, there is this thought, and the thought is that if you were to be able to take a pill, and by taking this pill, you could erase past trauma in your life and stuff like that, would you take it? I mean, that's the easiest way to put a summary to what the book is about. And, if you would take the pill, wouldn't it essentially be erasing the building blocks of your initial foundation? For example, if, you were hurt as a child, if your parents hit you with a belt or something like that, and you became the person you were because of that, if you wound up erasing that part of you, aren't you essentially erasing the building blocks and the foundations of your entire life because they were created from those moments? Maybe you became more sheltered, or maybe it changed you to the point where you knew you didn't want to do that to your children or anything. Like, wouldn't you at that point be taking away all of that good? Because, I believe in life that there is good and then there's also bad. So, if you remove some of the bad things that happen to you in your life, you could be also erasing the good. So it's just a question to ponder, as you're reading through the book. But as we're getting into the book, you go through the chapters and stuff like that. Basically, in the prologue, what winds up happening is Stella's having a nightmare. And within that nightmare, she sees her sister, Cecile. And it scares her because she's not seeing her in a normal light. She's seeing her in more of a ghostly light, and she's confused because, at the moment the dream feels real to her, but, ultimately she realizes at some point that it's not. And, thinking about, she knew her sister passed, and she speaks about that, as she's talking aloud, I know my sister died. This can't be real. And ultimately, the entire prologue is just strictly about Stella's nightmare. Now, there's nothing special about the prologue. It was just my way of introducing, main themes and stuff like that, as far as Cecile Morgan not being alive, which is Stella's sister, and then Stella, realizing that and talking about it. But then as we dive into the first chapter, which is called Welcome to My Life, it's basically an introduction at that point to talk about Stella as a person, so you can get an image and a sense of what she's about and, her day-to-day life. So she wakes up from her nightmare, and basically what's happening is she's reaching into her nightstand because she wakes up with terrible anxiety, from the nightmare that she had. And as she reaches into her nightstand, she notices she kept her razor there. Now, this is a razor, as a trigger warning to anybody listening. We're going to talk about some tough subjects and stuff like that, so if it gets too out of hand, please feel free to jump off, but just as a warning. Going forward, within that, she opens it up and she sees a razor. Now, the razor was something that she was used to self-harming with, and it brings back those memories for her of doing so. And, within that was loosely based off of my own personal struggles with self-harm. It was just a nod to that. It's also a very common symptom of borderline, which, as we're going through on Tuesdays, we're going to talk more about. So I won't jump into it too much because that'll be about next week's episode. So, but it is a big deal. Unfortunately a very common thing with borderlines, and I wanted to put that in the book to really drive home the emotional turmoil that Stella is going through. So the medication she's taking and such too, that was based off of what I was taking as well. At one point I was taking clozapam to deal with anxiety and stuff like that, and it really wasn't helping me. It was actually creating more anxiety when the medication wore off, so I had to stop taking it. She is getting up, she's reminiscing about those things and stuff like that. She's talking about, how she feels about everything, and she's describing her room as being messy and out of order, which is, similar to her own life. It's just complete chaos. At that point, she describes herself as being emo and wearing, all black and stuff like that. That obviously was modeled after myself. I wish I had a picture at the moment to bring up, but I used to dress like that and still kind of do, like an elder emo, I guess you would say. That was just always my style. I've always been drawn to darker colors, so you'll always usually see me wearing black. Black and gray have always been my favorite colors. So, just to bring more light about that and then get more of a description going. Now, when Stella gets up out of bed, because she realizes she's running late, she goes running down the stairs, basically, and she bumps into her dad. And then she goes into a little bit of a description of her dad. Now, her dad's name is Thomas Morgan, and he is the father of the two girls. Obviously, Cecile has passed, but, he is still the primary person in Stella's life. So she describes really quickly kind of the build of her dad, what he looks like and stuff like that. And then also at the same time, she talks about how, her dad was such a big person in the community. He was someone that people relied on. He was a good person, all that stuff. And then once Cecile wound up passing, her father basically turned into mush. He turned to alcohol. He wasn't paying attention not only to himself, but to the family as well. And he was kind of living with his demons and using alcohol to self-medicate the pain away. So basically that is a nod, because as I said in my previous videos, every character in the story is a different variation of myself, Thomas Morgan included. There was a point in my life when I was going through my divorce back in 2012 that, I had been drinking quite a bit, and, I would find myself, just as Stella describes, because she describes her father by saying that, Dad was the person that you could always count on and stuff like that, but then there were so many countless nights where I would find him sprawled out on the floor with pictures in his hand, reminiscing about the past, and, a drink in the other. And when I was going through my first divorce, I was doing similar things. I had been with that person for 7 years and, got married, and, I was going through it as well. So that's where the inspiration of that actually came from. It was from my own personal demons that I was dealing with before, I obviously got help and, got that sorted out. But that was a big thing for me, so I wanted to, pay homage to that in the book itself. Now, there's a reference in there where Stella talks about, she has this one really fond memory of her father. And that was when he would take her and her sister to the park, and he'd push them on the swings and stuff. And, no matter how high she would go, Dad was always there to basically catch her. And that was homage to my own father, in the sense that, he's been one of my number one supporters in my life, and, through all the chaos and stuff that I've gone through, he's always been, a very positive role model and father figure in my life to, catch me if I were to fall or something like that, or just show me support. And, I just wanted to pay that part of, homage to my relationship in my eyes to what he was. That, basically no matter what way I went, if things were getting wild with my BPD or life or whatever the case may be, he was always a constant that I could rely on to talk to and, be there for. So that was just a little tidbit of that. Now, I'm going to read a little bit of a page, just so you can get a little bit of a sense of what I'm talking about. So, On page 4, the second paragraph, Stella's talking, and she says, "My dad, Thomas Morgan, was a tall man, standing about 6'1", and he was what you would call of having a husky build. He had a really rough-looking beard, and you could tell it was not kept up with. Dad never had an unkempt appearance, and he looked this dead before Cecile was taken. Dad and I had that in common. We both lost this major piece inside when Cecile left us. We chose different methods of coping. Dad always ran to his old man whiskey's bottle and his photographs, whereas I ran for my blade. And there were countless nights where I would find Dad sprawled on the floor with a drink in his right hand and a photo of all of us in the left." And that's really just what it was. It was the two different ways that I was dealing with my own depression. So I made, a note for that. So as Stella unbumps with her father, she goes running off because she's actually trying to go to her mandatory psychotherapy appointment with her doctor. She's running out the door, and then that's when she starts to describe the town that it takes place in, which is Reidsville, New York. Now, Reidsville's not a real place. It's not like I grabbed it from somewhere. When I was in my early 20s, I currently work for the U.S. Postal Service. When I first started, I wound up working in a small little office. And out here where I live in New Jersey, it's very rural. So one of the post offices that I actually started in was only open 4 hours a day, and it was inside of like an old early 1900s like deli slash, it almost looked like a saloon. It had a giant bar and stuff in it, but the deli wasn't running, but the building was well over 100 years old. And then the whole town of Middleville, where I worked, was the inspiration for Reidsville. It was like a very like low-key town. There wasn't anything like big about it. There's your general stores and your local shops and stuff like that where you could walk to. Even the town next to it, Stillwater, very similar, and that's where I got a lot of the inspiration from as far as constructing Reidsville. The name Reidsville, I just figured I would make like a little, I don't know the word, kind of like a sneaky thing in there. Like, it's called Reidsville because I want you to read the book, but also the Ville because of Middleville, where I started my postal career. So as Stella's, running to her appointment and stuff like that, she begins to talk about, one of the most disturbing things in her life, which led her to ultimately joining the therapy. And in that, she talks about how she was going to the Reidsville General Store, which you're going to hear a lot about in both books. It's one of the most popular places in the book where most people go. We have a lot of that around here. Local delis and stuff like that here in New Jersey, where, they know everybody. I mean, there's a deli right down the street from me that I've been going to since I was a little kid. And, I know the people very well, and that's the kind of mentality that I wanted to show in the book. Like, it's that type of setting. So she talks about how she was going to the Reidsville store, and Stella's a smoker. I'm also a smoker, that's why I put that in there. She was going to pick up a pack of cigarettes, and she was going to see her boyfriend, and when she got there, she noticed that he was cheating through the window, and her remedy for that, because she was so caught up in the moment and stuff like that, was that she took a rock and she threw it through the window, and as the glass was shattering, she was running home. Now, that didn't happen in my real life. I found out about my ex-wife and then also my child's mother cheating in very unsatisfactory ways, but it wasn't like that super intense. But I was paying homage to that first feeling when you find out, like, especially someone that you like idolize so much, like, and then they get that fall from grace because they're not being as faithful as you are, and clearly are not as committed as you are. So it's it's a tough thing to deal with. And the situation in particular was when I was younger, I actually was at one of those delis when I found out that my ex-wife, when I first started dating her, I found out that she had cheated on me. And, in the book, Stella talks about after she saw that, when she ran home, she went into the garage and she basically, at that point, saw a razor, and that is what got her started on the whole self-harm thing. My situation was very similar. I was at a deli when I first found out about it, and then I had a pocket knife, and then that's how, unfortunately, that began and led to a couple years of doing so. It's not something I'm proud of, but it's also something I'm not ashamed of because it helped me get to where I am. And you have to come clean. You have to be honest about it. You have to, accept responsibility that you made stupid decisions, but you learned from it. You got better, and things got better ultimately. You found healthy ways to deal with things, but not everybody is at that point in their life. And, I'm sure there's people, because I've had them reach out to me, who read the book that still, unfortunately, are going down those paths. And, the whole point of these sessions and stuff like that is to show that there's other ways to deal with it. It doesn't have to go that far, because every life, is important. And, maybe it is just a little bit of hurting or burning or whatever the case may be, but you can do it in a much healthier way. You know what I mean? Like, one of the biggest things they tell you in therapy is you could do something like you take a really cold ice cube, or maybe 2 ice cubes, and you just grip it in your hand. And it's not going to be something that hurts you, but, the cold in your hand, it's like a pain that you can focus on rather than doing things like that. I've also heard of other techniques as well, where people would put rubber bands on their arms and they'd snap them. There's so many different things that you can do rather than go down to the most extreme scenario where you hurt yourself or potentially even go too far, and then you can't undo that. So, I wanted to put it in the book. I know it's a rough subject and nobody really wants to talk about, and even personally, it's not easy to talk about, but I learned over the years you have to be honest. And in being that honest, you can basically clean what's going on inside of you and, bring everyone together and unite through it. It's a shared pain that, a lot of us go through, and you basically have to stick together and try to not do those things, because there are healthier alternatives. So in that, Stella talks about her first time doing with that, and then, she talks about at that point, it became like an avenue for her. It became an avenue for her to deal with the pain, because in her mind, it was a pain she could control. When the world around her was closing in on her, she could actually control this and at least temporarily make it go away. And that's the most common thing that you hear with people who have BPD. It's the same reason why I did it. And it's just a pain you can control when everything around you is just going straight to hell. Like, you can just control that. So basically, at that point, she talks about how it became like a habit. Her father wound up finding out about it from seeing the marks on her arms and stuff like that. So because at the time when it was going on, she was under the age of 18, she went on to do a mandatory psych hold. So she had to go do that where she was medicated and stuff like that, and she was very reluctant to it, and she almost felt like her dad betrayed her and stuff because, she was locked up at that point. Well, locked up is a strong word. She was seeking treatment, not wanting to, but was seeking treatment. And her dad did it with the best intentions. And that part's not based off anything in my own reality. It's just, where I wanted the story to go to get Stella to be able to have a reason as to why she was seeing her doctor. So while Stella was on the hold, she was going to group therapy and stuff like that, and she was also doing her one-on-one counseling. That part was a nod to me because, as I spoke about last night, when I was getting out of the Navy, when my time was up, I had to go through a battery test and stuff like that, and that's when they, learned about the self-harm, and they learned about, my issues with alcohol at the time because I was going through a divorce and I was using that as a crutch. So they learned about all that, and, they became concerned, so they wanted to dig deeper. And it was like Tuesdays I was going to one therapist, and then like Wednesdays I was going to another one, and then Thursdays I was going to group. And, it was good at the time. I was being able to vent. I'd never done that before, so, that was kind of nice to be able to talk to somebody and get some issues out and stuff like that and figure out, like, what was actually going on, if it was just basic depression or if there was more to it. So, and I learned through that there was a lot more to it, which is how I got diagnosed. But I wrote in there, and Stella talks about that when she was in group, you basically just, like, walk in a group, and it's just a big show. One of my favorite songs by Blue October, I was wearing the shirt for that reason, is called HRSA, which stands for High Risk Self-Abuse. And the lead singer, Justin Furstenfeld, talks about in that too, like, he committed himself because he was going through a bad breakup and stuff, and, he's dealing with his own depression and stuff. But, like, when you get to group, like, you walk in there and you're basically putting on a show. or it's like a show and tell, like you're talking about the terrible things in your life, and people are talking about their own, and you share and you try to find coping mechanisms to deal with it so you can all move on together. It's no different than AA or NA, you know what I mean? It's all similar, just for different reasons and stuff like that. And some people enjoy the group thing. I personally, at that time, I didn't. I wasn't really into sharing my problems, and I felt a little off because some people have more severe problems than mine, and I was very young, so I wasn't taking it super seriously at that point in my life. Had I, it probably would have been beneficial for me, but at that point in time, my only focus was, my time was up. I was ready to go home. I wasn't happy when I was in the military, when I was stationed out in California, going through a divorce and stuff like that. It was very lonely, and it's not good to do that, because when my wife at the time moved back to New Jersey, I almost felt like abandoned at that point. She kind of just like left me high and dry, on the literally other side of the United States. So, it was a lot for me to deal with, and my sole focus was just going home. So, that's why I put in there when Stella's describing about her time with therapy and stuff like that, it's very similar to my own time with it. Then while Stella is talking about her therapy and stuff like that, she begins to speak about how she's going to be getting out of, or as she's getting out of, the mental institution, or mental health clinic, as she's getting out of it, there's a doctor who vouched for her. And she thought that was strange because she didn't know this doctor from anything. So she thought it was very weird that some random person would just vouch for her. And the doctor's excuse to that was that she said that she knew her when she was very young and she knew she was a good person, so she wanted to try to help her out. Now, that is what first introduces us to Dr. Evelyn Clark. She is the psychologist for Stella in the book. She's her one-on-one therapist. They do their, couple times a week therapy sessions where Stella is mandated to do so because as a part of her discharge, she needed to seek psychotherapy. That was like a thing with her dad and stuff, and she had been doing it for quite some time now. Dr. Clark was modeled after somebody in my life, which we will get to as we progress in the story. I'm not going to jump into that now because I don't want to give any spoilers away or anything like that, but later at another time in our talks, we will definitely get into that. Now, Stella talks about how, it was hard for her when she got that diagnosis because she thought, just as I did, when they told me that I had borderline personality disorder, I thought, well, does that mean like I'm on like the borderline of like having an issue and like not having an issue? When the reality is it's not. It's actually, one of the hardest diagnoses, worldwide, when you look it up, they always say that. Because, like I said last night, nobody really wants to tackle it. Nobody really wants to deal with it, with the constant influx of emotions, and then the black and white thinking, and then the self-harm, and everything else, which, again, we will get into on next Tuesday. But, a lot of people don't want to tackle it. And, when she's told, just as I was, what it actually entails, it's almost like, okay, I get it. Like, that's why I'm doing that. That's why I'm feeling that way. That it puts a lot of pieces together when you actually look up the symptoms and see, like, oh, okay, that's why. So then she thinks of it at that time, and they put the blame for where it starts, because ultimately they say borderline starts in adolescence, like early childhood. Usually if it's something to do with abuse or neglect. That's usually where it's bred. In my own personal case, my mom left when I was very young. She didn't want to be a parent to me whatsoever. So, obviously my dad stepped up and he raised me. I think he did a great job. He did the same with, me and my brother. My dad just made it work. So, I put that in my book as well, because that was like a big thing for me in my life, that, my mom left when I was about 2 years old and just didn't really want anything to do with it. So that's why I had Stella get diagnosed for what they say is the same reason. But there's lots of things that happen in life that either agitate it or create it or whatever. So for them to just point it to one thing, it doesn't always make sense. Like, sure, that's where it starts. Like, maybe your fear of abandonment is because somebody that's supposed to be super close to you left when you were so young, when you were still developing. So I completely get where that's coming from. But, it leads me into my next point, is that on page 9, right before the first chapter ends, there's a quote in there, and it was something that I added in right before I published the book. And what it said was that, it's the last line of that, Stella talks about how she was always a caring person and putting others before herself, so now why do I have to be in prison with a diagnosis that will label me with the scarlet letter for the rest of my life? So, people here, you have borderline. If they know what it is, a lot of the time in my experience, you get judged pretty quickly. They don't even bother to see the positives that borderline bring, like the over-caringness and like the wanting to show emotion and stuff like that. Like, you know, borderlines love harder than like most people. It's just a fact. We feel emotions more intensely, good emotions, bad emotions. But there was something that was said when I was going through a custody battle for my daughter. One of the people who diagnosed me, the second person to ever diagnose me with it, was called to testify, so I guess he could get a better understanding to the judge about, you know, what it was and what exactly was to expect and if it hindered my parenting at all. Now, he had explained that I never had incident, that I never had anything that would hinder me from being a parent, and still to this day have not. I think I'm a wonderful father to my daughter. I've never had an issue whatsoever. But you know, he came out, and the way that the defense was making it seem was that, you know, it was like, you can't be a parent because you have this thing. But he said that, you know, it's not like that. It's not like that. Like, it'd be something if I had a history of, like, you know, horrible things and stuff like that. Like, if I was abusive or verbally abusive or manipulative or anything like that. Like, he said, he's like, there's no documented things of these things. There's never been accused of it. There's none of this stuff. So basically what you're doing is you're labeling him like he has a scarlet letter on him just because of a diagnosis, and that's not the case. It's not. And I did my own research, you know, when this was going on and stuff like that, and I even realized at that point in time, I said, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot for someone to sit there and say, you can't have this because of this reason, but we have no reason really other than, you know, just because of something that happened in your past. And I thought that was just so horrible. Like, you know, and I put that in my book in there as well. It's like, why am I paying for, like, if you want to label it and say you have borderline because your, you know, mother or your mother didn't want to be a parent and walked away, but you're telling me I can't be a parent because of something she had done like 30 years prior. So I'm essentially paying for the sins of my mother. And that just didn't make sense to me, because in my life growing up, my father always taught us that you want to provide a 50% better lifestyle for your child than, you know, you had. And, you know, my dad gave us me and my brother, he gave us a very great life. And it was, you know, it's hard to amount up to that, to be able to do that. But it is a goal of mine because that's the way I was raised. So for you to be told that you can't parent because of something that's on a piece of paper, I mean, you're just punishing me for what my mom did. And I put that in there as well, that she's paying for the sins of her mother. She has to go through this therapy. She has to constantly be like looked at like there's something wrong with her, but it's like because of what someone else did, with a selfish decision that someone else made many, many years ago. So that brings us to the end of the chapter. Each week on Thursdays, we're going to do one more chapter. We're going to do, you know, deep dives into this and stuff like that, so you guys can get not only an understanding of the book, but how it was pieced together, and, you know, we can talk a little bit about everything that's going on in the book and in your own lives as well. You know what I mean? We have the live chat going and stuff like that, and, you know, I'll open it up now while I'm finishing up talking and stuff like that. If you guys want to ask any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything you have about the book, anything personal. You know, don't hold back. That's the whole point of us doing this, is to be honest and to be there for each other and stuff. So, with that being said, I'll just give you a quick expectations of what to come. Next Tuesday will be the next time I go live. On there, I will be talking about the 3rd and 4th symptoms of borderline. Once we get through all 9 of them, we're going to dive into other subjects. I know that Stormy has talked about jumping on and talking about autism, because that's something that is very important in her life. And it actually, she even did her own research that it's very similar to borderline, just in a different way. So, we'll talk about that. If anyone wants any subjects for us to talk about, we can definitely go through the big book of AA or whatever the case may be. But each week we're going to find new things to get through, so that we can get everybody to band together that's following it for healing purposes and stuff like that, that we can all unite to help each other. Because, there's so much bad in the world and stuff like that, and, everybody has their own quirks, everybody has their own things, but, if we're there for each other and we help each other, that's really what it's about. And we need more of that in the world. And, usually I've always been a shy person growing up and stuff like that, but, to get the feedback from you guys who have reached out to me and said, like, how much this has helped you and stuff like that, like, it's such a humbling experience. I wish I knew a better way to describe it, but that's really what it is. Every time I get one of those messages, it's like, it makes it all worth it. And, of course, jumping on in front of a live audience and stuff like that, it is nerve-wracking a little bit, but, the more love and support that I keep seeing, and that these things are actually, like, enjoyed and stuff like that, it makes it worth it. It really does. And that's going to be our Tuesdays. On Thursdays, we're going to go through each chapter of each book with the insights and stuff like that. So if you want to follow along with the book, if you're just getting into the book now, you can go on the Amazon site. You can Google, or on Amazon, you can look up The Souls of Paradise, Family is Forever, and you'll be able to find the book. And if you want to get the second one, it's also on there, Paradise Reborn. I'll show you that. Paradise Reborn. And it is a direct sequel, obviously, to the very first one. But if you want to read along with me, chapter a week or whatever the case may be, so you can also get the insight to the story and stuff like that, I invite you to do so. I love seeing you guys when you get the book. If you want to get the Kindle version, it's 99 cents for both of them on Amazon. If you want the hardcover and the softcover, it is a little bit more. It has nothing to do with me. I only make about $1.32 per book when it comes to hardcover and softcover, because I'm not doing it for the money. Amazon really takes like 85% of that. There's not much I can do about the prices with that. If I can't really make it any lower before they won't allow me to. So, but, on Thursdays, that's what we're going to do. We're going to jump into the chapters and get some insight as to what's going on. And then Fridays, in the past, I have always, done updates and stuff like that. Like I said, I am working on the third book. It's not coming along as fast as the other book, but it is coming along. I am on chapter 2 of it, and I'm still working on it, but we will get it. I am anticipating, hopefully, by spring of next year, I should have most of it done, because, when I set myself to a deadline, I actually knock it out pretty well. Case in point, The Souls of Paradise is about 236 pages, whereas to Paradise Reborn is like 500 and something pages. And The Souls of Paradise took me a very, very long time to do, but Paradise Reborn got me so motivated when I published the first book in October that I had Paradise Reborn done by Memorial Day the following year. And that was more than double the size. So I just got to find the proper motivation to jump in there, and I think that, while we're helping each other, I think that doing this and reading the chapters again and stuff like that not only will motivate me, but, it'll help me come up with the ideas where my writer's block is sitting right now on how to progress. Because although I know how I want the third one to end, I still got to get the meat of it. And I know the big things I want to happen, but, the way I write and stuff like that, it's just going to take like an inspiration moment. So on Fridays, I will give you guys updates as they come up. It won't be every Friday, but, as they come up, I will definitely do so. And, I want to thank you guys for sitting here and spending the time to listen to the Easter eggs, that I have hidden throughout this book. I can assure you, as the book goes on, and especially when we get into the second book, there is a lot. There is tons and tons of them, and the people I have told them to so far thought they were very, clever and stuff like that, and it gives you a better insight to who I am as a person. So before I let you go, If anyone wants to reach out to me on a private chat because they don't want to air their business on a live chat, just to chat, talk about anything, feel free to do so. You can reach me on here, or if you go on our Facebook, you can also reach me that way as well. So thank you guys again so much for coming out and spending the Thursday night with me, and I will see you again on Tuesday.